This passage is about robots. You see, small, tiny robots. There's a lot of science involved in the passage, so you don't have to go through all the details there. But he is talking about tiny robots which may be manufactured and which may be used, you see, at the microscopic level. So he begins with talking about the new X-Men comics, and now they had nano sentinels. Previously, they had sentinels there. Now they have nano sentinels, and there were tiny robots. So that is what he is talking about in the first paragraph. In the second paragraph, he is talking about what goes into the manufacture of those tiny robots, the small robots. He's talking about hydrogel and elastic polymers and all these things, their size, their what you call shape. He's talking about all these things in the second paragraph. And in the third paragraph, he goes on, he expands upon what he has said, and he says that the new kind of robots are made from molecular parts. That is, they can move about independently and so forth. It's assembled from two kinds of molecules which interact to allow the bot to skate on the top of a pond. That is, one molecule may be water friendly, the other may not. So the point that he's making is the advancement in the manufacture of robots. In the third paragraph, he says that the conventional robots, you see, advancement has been made on them, and possibly they might work like a chip would do. That is the point he's trying to make here. And the last paragraph, he says, well, he wants to see the future with such kinds of robots. He wants to see the future, you see, in that way, where you have lots of tiny robots controlling everything. So now let's come to the question: which one of the following statement best captures the sense of the first paragraph? The X-Men were mutant heroes who now had to battle tiny robots called nano sentinels. You can see that for yourself in the first paragraph. That is the germane sentence, the basic seminal sentence, and that is the answer. Number two is the answer. If you look at number three, people who were infected by nano sentinel robots became mutants who were called X-Men. No, tiny sentinels called X-Men infected people. Now, that is not the point there. Let's come to the next question. Which one of the following statements best summarizes the central point of the passage? Nano robots made from molecules that react to water have become increasingly useful. Now, that is one out of many points. That cannot be the right answer because that is one of the points that's mentioned, and that's mentioned in the last line of the, I think, third paragraph. That is not the central idea. He's just given an example of the X-Men comics to explain his point. Once the stuff of science fiction, nano robots now feature in cutting edge scientific research. That's the point. That's the point he's trying to make. That once upon a time they were part of the X-Men comics or scientific fiction, and now you can feature them, you can see them being featured in cutting edge scientific research. So, number three is the correct option. Robots will use nano robots on their feet and wheels to climb walls or move to ceilings. That is a point that has been made, but that isn't the central idea. Now, the next question: which one of the following statements, if true, would be the most direct extension of the arguments in the passage? Right. Let's see. Sentinel robots will be used in warfare to cause large-scale destructive mutations among civilians. I think it's not an extension of the argument in the passage, at least. 1 centimeter blobs of gel that have nano robots in them will be used to send messages. That could be one of the points, but it's not a direct extension of the main argument in the passage. X-Men may be created by injecting people with mutant nanogels that will respond to the brain's magnetic field. No. In the future, robots will be used to search and destroy diseases even in the deepest recesses of the human body. That is the point that he's trying to make. You see, that's an extension of the argument. You see, this could be an extension of the argument. So, number four is the correct option. The next question: which one of the following scenarios, if false, could be seen as supporting the passage? I mean, if it is false, even then you can see it is supporting the passage. There are two kinds of molecules used to make some nanorobots. No, that is not false. That is true. That is true. And you can see that in the last line of the third paragraph. Robots made from smart materials are likely to become part of our everyday lives in the future. No. Nano sentinel like robots are likely to be used to inject people to convert them into robots cell by cell. Yeah, That is the point. So number 3 is the correct option. And then you have some hydrogels turn sticky when an electric current is passed through them. That is. Now let's come to the next passage. This passage is all about the unconscious. You see, the unconscious is a term in psychology. The subconscious, the conscious, and the unconscious, they are terms in psychology. And the basic point is, which hasn't been, of course, mentioned in the passage, it was Freud and other psychologists, you see, who came up with the point that all human beings, you see, they have the human beings, they have the unconscious. Everything is fed into the unconscious, and our reactions, our what you call responses, are sometimes because of what is there in the unconscious mind. And unconscious is not something which is present. It is something which happens to contain in itself, you see, maybe thousands of years of history, you see, in the human mind. That could be one of the points here. The first paragraph is talking about what you call the unconscious, defined by Freud, and the definition of the unconscious. He says it's embody the fleeting ideas and the shifting conceptions of several generations. And then finally, it got a status in psychology. He's trying to define the unconscious. And in the second paragraph, he talks about the 19th century. And in the 19th century, you see, they started working, you see, on the same lines of the soul, of the mind, the unconscious, you see, and they were looking for a definition there. The drawn out attempt to approach and define the unconscious brought together the spiritualist and the psychical research of borderline phenomena. You see, I just read out this line because what he's trying to say is here, the unconscious was something in which everyone was interested. You have the spiritualist, you have the psychical researcher, you have the psychiatrist or the alienist, you have what you call the surgeon, you've got the magnetizer, you've got the physiologist, you've got the physician, you've got the neurologist, you've got the philosopher, and everyone, you see, interpreting the unconscious according to his or her understanding of the term. Each one was, you see, having a particular concept of the unconscious. You see. That is what point he's trying to make here. And in the third paragraph, he talks about or he gives an example of hypnotism in surgery or psychological magnetism that originated in the 18th century and during the early decades of the 19th century. And then he talks about creative genius, the relationship between the creative genius and the hallucinations of the insane. Now, what does he mean by that? That is, your creativity has to do something with the unconscious mode of unconsciousness. And then in the last term, he talks about the introduction of the term unconscious by Hartman in 1869, how he defines it. What does he say in the last line? Look, ultimately, Hartman's attempt at defining the unconscious proved fruitless because he extended its reach into every realm of organic and inorganic, spiritual, intellectual, and instinctive existence, severely diluting the precision and compromising the impact of the concept. So it became more or less a common term, you see, unconscious. So they weren't able to, Hartman wasn't able to define that in a very proper manner. So now you can understand what the passage is all about. It has to do more with psychology and psychoanalysis. Now, let's look at the questions here. All of the following statements may be considered valid inferences from the passage, except, one statement, you see, cannot be a valid inference. Unrelated practices began to be treated as related to each other as knowledge of the mind grew in the 19th century. That's correct. 18th century thinkers were the first to perceive a connection between creative genius and insanity. That's correct. He has just said that in the last line, the third paragraph, between creative genius and the hallucinations of the insane. And then you have, without the linguistic developments of the 19th century, the growth of understanding of the soul and the mind may not have happened. That's correct. New conceptions in the 19th century could provide new knowledge because of the establishment of fields such as anesthesiology. We don't have this point there. This can't be inferred, you see. So number 4 is the correct option. The next question, The enrichments of literary and intellectual language led to an altered understanding of the meanings that underline time-honored expressions and traditional catchwords. Which one of the following interpretations of this sentence could be closest in meaning to the original? You see, this is a line he has quoted from the passage, I think. This is there in the passage, and now he wants you to choose one of these sentences which would be close to the meaning of the quoted lines, right? All of the options listed here, no. Time honored expressions and traditional catchwords were enriched by literary and intellectual language. No. The meanings of time honored expressions were changed by innovations in literary and intellectual language. That is the answer there. So, number three is the correct option. The next question: which one of the following sets of word is closest to mapping the main arguments of the passage? I think it's quite clear. It's the option is number four, because in number four you have the language, you have unconscious, and you have psychoanalysis. Number one leaves out the unconscious, and therefore number one cannot be the correct answer. Number two talks about literary language and insanity but doesn't bring in psychoanalysis, which is an important point, because the unconscious has to do a lot with psychology and psychoanalysis. Number three leaves out psychoanalysis as well as language, you see. And number four has these three things. So number four is the correct option. The next question: which one of the following statements best describes what the passage is about? Is the passage about the discovery of the unconscious as a part of the human mind? It's not totally about that. The growing vocabulary of the soul and the mind as diverse processes? No, that is not the main point. The collating of diverse ideas under the single term unconscious. Yes, that is the thing. The collating of diverse ideas. If you remember, I read out those lines in the second paragraph where he talks about the surgeon, the physician, the psychical researcher, the magnetizer, the physiologist, and the magnetizer, and then you have the psychologist, the psychoanalyst, each one you see interpreting what you call the term unconscious. So number three is the correct option. The identification of the unconscious and an aspect of psychological research. No, it's number three. So we come to the next passage. This passage talks about the acquisition of language, and it is based on Chomskyan theory. Noam Chomsky was a well-known linguist, a well-known figure in the world of language and linguistics. The contention in the first paragraph, all that description that he gives is that Chomsky had a theory of the innate structures. What do you mean by innate structures? That is, he said that a child, you see, any newborn infant is equipped with a structure in the brain which contains the grammar of the language, you see. So the child acquires the language with the help of that grammar. You must try to understand this point when he's talking about the theory of innate structures. Innate means by birth. His student, you see, Chomsky's student or perhaps colleague Steven Pinker, you see, he brought to the attention of the people that language is something which is already fed into the child's mind ever since its birth. And in the second paragraph, he talks about universal grammar. Now, what do you mean by universal grammar? What Chomsky argued in his book was that every child, all of us in fact, and children especially, you see, they have a universal grammar that is fed into their cerebral cortex, in their brain. It is something like a black box, you see, which contains all the grammatical rules, which contains all the grammar of any language. The child is exposed to that language, and you see, that helps the child acquire the language quickly. I mean, his contention was parents never teach any language to the child. The first language that the child speaks, no parent teaches the language. The child acquires the language, you see, on its own. It learns the rules of grammar on its own. So there is already, you see, a universal grammar that is fed into the brain of the child, and it makes use of those rules and regulations, you see, in constructing sentence. That is what Chomsky argued. And when it comes to what you call the primates or chimpanzees, you see, you don't have that kind of a thing. Of course, this man in the third paragraph says that Pinker was more or less interested in the Darwinian framework than of natural selection and evolution. But the point is, he has a difference of opinion there. The point is, he says that the primates, the chimpanzees, they can also what you call learn and use grammar, learn the language, use the language. But the thing is, they cannot what you call produce or you see use grammar, right? So that is why you see they cannot speak or construct sentences. And then in the last paragraph, Steve Pinker, you see his colleague, who talks about the roots of language being in the genes, but he argues that there cannot be a grammar gene. And then he talks about biological determinism and racism. You see, Mr. Pinker stresses one point that should allay such fears, they are all sufficiently alike to be considered the language by extraterrestrial observers. In other words, most of the diversity of the world's cultures, so beloved to anthropologists, is superficial and minor compared to the similarities. Racial differences are literally only skin deep. The fundamental unity of humanity is the theme of Mr. Chomsky's universal grammar and of this exciting. You see, racialism and other things don't matter when it comes to the universal grammar. Each child, each infant, you see, is equipped with that kind of a grammar. I think now the passage is quite simple that way, because it has only two or three main points. Number one, it's the Chomsky's theories of innate structures. Number two, the universal grammar that goes into what you call the brain of every child. Number three, you have the comparison with the primates. And number four, you see Pinker's acceptance of the Darwinian theory. You see, that is the point that is being made here. Now, the questions: which one of the following statements best summarizes the author's position about Pinker's book? He says culture and environment play a key role in shaping our acquisition of language. No. The universality of the language instinct counters claim that Pinker's book is racist. That is the correct answer. The next question: on the basis of the information in the passage, Pinker and Chomsky may disagree with each other on which of the following points? I told you they would disagree, you see, on the Darwinian explanatory paradigm for language. Chomsky doesn't go for that. I told you that is where Pinker differs from Chomsky, you see, when he talks about the Darwinian theory. So, number three is the correct option. And you have the answer in paragraph number 3. Unlike Mr. Chomsky, Mr. Pinker firmly places the wiring of the brain for language within the framework of Darwinian natural selection and evolution. From the passage, it can be inferred that all of the following are true about Pinker's book, The Language Instinct, except that Pinker writes in a different style from Chomsky, no, draws extensively from Chomsky's propositions, draws from behavioral psychology theories. That is the answer. Because Pinker doesn't draw from behavioral psychological theory, disagrees with Chomsky on certain grounds. Okay, the answer is number 3. The next question: according to the passage, all of the following are true about the language instinct, except that we read that all intelligent primates are gifted with it. Is it so? Are they gifted with the language instincts? So that's an exception. Number 3 is the correct option. Not all intelligent primates are gifted with it. It confers an evolutionary reproductive advantage. Developments in neuroscience have increased its acceptance. That's all true. The one that is an exception is number 3. The next passage is a little scientific, you see, and it has to do a lot of science that way. But you have got to just understand the feel of the passage, what it is talking about. You don't have to go through all the scientific details that are given there. The major points that you have to mind in is one word is entropy. ENTROPY, entropy. Entropy means disorder, wastage, that is entropy. That is one of the main things in the passage. In the first paragraph, he talks about the clock and he talks about the ticking of the clock. What he says here is that every time the clock ticks, you see, the gap between two ticks for that matter, every time you have a tick there, the clock moving up and down or up and above, there is some kind of entropy, some kind of disorder going on. See, look at the first line. The maximum accuracy of a clock is directly related to how much disorder or entropy it creates every time it ticks. And each time the membrane moved up and down once and then returned to its original position. The researchers counted a tick, and the regularity of the spacing between the ticks represented the accuracy of the clock. Okay, and the researchers found that as they increased the clock's accuracy, the heat produced in the system grew, increasing the entropy of its surroundings by jostling nearby parts. So I read out these lines only to explain the point. That is, when you have the gap between the ticks and that keeps on increasing, what happens is there is a lot of entropy that is created, disorder that is created. And if the universe, you see, gets entropied in this way, there could be some kind of damage. But about the clock, you see, that clock is only an example. Now, the next point that he makes in the second paragraph is, if you look at it has been suggested that the reason that time only flows forward, not in reverse, is that the total amount of entropy in the universe is constantly increasing, creating disorder that cannot be put in order again. Okay, now that is what he's talking about, the entropy that is created, the disorder that is created, right? And in the third paragraph, he says the relationship that the researchers found is a limit on the accuracy of a clock. So it doesn't mean that a clock that creates the most possible entropy would be maximally accurate. So it doesn't mean that if there is a lot of accuracy, maximum what you call entropy, that then it is maximally correct. It's not that. So, and then he goes on to say about the inefficient grandfather clock. If you look at the last paragraph, he talks about what he call the quantum effects. They were surprised to find that the relationship between accuracy and entropy seemed to be the same for both the theoretical models developed for clock. We can't be sure yet these results are actually universal, though, because there are many types of clocks for which the relationship between accuracy and entropy haven't been tested. It's still unclear how this principle plays out in real devices such as atomic clocks, which push the ultimate quantum limits of accuracy, says Mark Mitchison at Trinity College, Dublin in Ireland. Understanding this relationship could be helpful for designing clocks in the future, particularly those used in quantum computers and other devices where both accuracy and temperature are crucial, says Aries. This finding could also help us understand more generally how the quantum world and the classical world are similar and different in terms of thermodynamics and the passage of time. So what he is talking about is the usage of certain things and the gap that's created and the entropy that results, the disorder that results from that. That is the main thing in the passage. And now we can come to the questions here. Which one of the following sets of words and phrases serves best as keywords of this passage? So the key words of this passage is measuring time, accuracy, and entropy. That is number 3. The author makes all of the following arguments in the passage, except that the relationship between accuracy and entropy may not apply to all clocks. That he has stated there. Researchers found that the heat produced in the system is the price paid for increased accuracy of measurement. It's only about the clock. It's not an argument that's made in the passage. So number 2 is the correct option. There is no difference in accuracy between an inefficient in grandfather clock and an atomic clock. Okay, the others are okay. The next question. It's a bit like fuel used in a car. Just because I am using more fuel doesn't mean that I am going faster or further. What is the purpose of this example? Well, the purpose is if you go faster in a car, you will tend to consume more fuel. But the converse is not necessarily true, right? Necessarily true. That is, if you go slow, it doesn't mean you'll be consuming less fuel. In the same way, increased entropy does not necessarily mean greater accuracy of a clock. So that is the point that he wants to make here. So number 1 is the correct option. None of the following statements can be inferred from the passage except that the arrow of time has not yet been tested for atomic clocks. Can it be inferred? No. Quantum computers are likely to produce more heat and hence more entropy because of the emphasis on their clock's accuracy. That is the answer. Number 2 is the correct option. And the others, you see, grandfather clocks are likely to produce. No, it's not that. Now, let's come to the next question here. A typical example is Wikipedia, where the overwhelming majority of contributors are male, and so the available content is skewed to reflect their interests. Without diversity of thought and representation, society is left with a distorted picture of future options which are likely to result in augmenting existing inequalities. Gross gender inequality in the technology sector is problematic not only for the industry wide marginalization of women, but because technology designs embody the values of their makers. While redressing unequal representation in the workplace is a step in the right direction, broader social change is needed to address the structural inequalities embedded within the current organization of work and employment. If technology reflects the perspectives of the male stereotype, then new technologies are unlikely to accommodate the diverse social context within which they operate. Well, he's talking about two things. One is the male stereotype and the technologies. I think number four is the odd one out, because here he's talking about unequal representation and then structural inequalities, which don't go on with the other four. So number four is the odd one out. Let's look at the next question. It is regimes of truth that make certain relationships speakable, relationships like subjectivities and so forth. Relationships are nothing without the communication that bring in. Now, number two is a general sentence. So we can have number two as the first sentence here. Interpersonal communication is connected to knowledge shared by interlocutors, and scholars should attend to relational histories in their analysis. A Foucauldian approach to relationships goes beyond these conceptions of discourse. So, look, he has talked about the analysis, the interpersonal communication, and they are actually the conceptions of discourse. So therefore, after two, we must have three, because the reference to these conceptions of discourse lies in number two. So two is followed by three. And then after three, look, he says here in three, what does he say? Beyond these conceptions of discourse and history of macro level regimes of truth as constituting relationship. So after three, we must have one, because he's talking about the regimes of truth in number one, which he has already talked about in number three. There is a reference to the regimes of truth in number one, to number three. So two, three, one, and the last one is four. Now let's come to the next exercise. Now, if you read the passage, people view idleness as a sin and industriousness as a virtue. That is, hard work as virtue and laziness as a sin. And in the process have developed an unsatisfactory relationship with their jobs. Work has become a way for them to keep busy, even though many find their work meaningless. In their need for activity, people undertake what was once considered work, fishing, gardening as hobby. The opposing view is that hard work has made us prosperous and improved our levels of health and education. It has also brought innovation and labor and time-saving devices which have lessened life's treasury. Now you can understand the main points in the passage. One is talk about idleness and laziness and hard work. Laziness is a sin and hard work is a virtue, you see. But people, you see, they have developed, you see, the wrong relationship with their jobs, because they are doing jobs, but they find their work meaningless. They don't feel that they are busy with their work. They're not satisfied with their work. But the opposing view is that hard work, you see, makes people prosperous and improves their health and education, and it brings in innovation and so forth. With these main points in mind, let's look at which of these summaries, you see, is the best one. Some believe that hard work has been glorified to the extent that it has become meaningless. Now, that is changing the meaning of the sentence and led to greater idleness. No, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say. There are two different things, right? But it has also had enormous positive impacts on everyday life. That's not a good summary. Despite some detractors, hard work is essential in today's world to enable economic progress for education and health and to propel innovations that make life easier. No, he doesn't talk about why people find the jobs meaningless, right? So number two is not a good option. While the idealization of hard work has propelled people into meaningless jobs and endless activity, It has also led to tremendous social benefits from prosperity and innovation. That is a good summary because that contains all the points and it has been written very well. You see, when you look to the summary, you've got to look to so many things. You've got to see whether the main point has been included. What is the language? Is the language good? I mean, is it terse and succinct? So number three is the best option. The next one. Here in this, he says here, the human mind is wired to see patterns. Not only does the brain process information as it comes in, it also stores insight from all our past experience. So that is the unconscious that we talked about in one of the reading and comprehension passages, right? That is all your insights from the past experiences are stored in the unconscious. Every interaction, happy or sad, is cataloged in our memory. Intuition draws from that deep memory well to inform our decisions going forward. In other words, intuitive decisions are based on data and not contrary to data as many would like to assume. And that data, you see, are drawn from the unconscious, right? When we are subconsciously spot patterns, the body starts firing neurochemicals in both the brain and the gut. These somatic markers are what give us that instant sense that something is right or that's off. Not only are these automatic processes faster than rational thought, but our intuition draws from decades of diverse qualitative experience, sights, sounds, a wholly human feature that big data alone could never accomplish. The main thing in the passage is about the working of the unconscious. And let us see which one of it is a good summary. Intuitions are automatic processes and are therefore faster than rational thought, and so decisions based on them are better. No, that's not the correct option. Intuition is infinitely richer than big data, which is based on no, that's again incorrect. And incorrect in the sense the whole point is not included. Intuition draws from deep memory and may not be related to data. No, it may be related to data, right? But to decades of diverse qualitative and experience. All these three miss out, you see, on certain points about the patterns. And here in number four, you have intuitions are neurochemical firings based on pattern recognition and draw upon a rich and vast database of experience. So number four is the best option, you see. Another exercise, you say they include a foundation course on navigating capitalism with Chinese characteristics and have replaced typical cases from US corporates with a focus on how Western theories applied to China's buzzing local firms. The best Chinese business schools look like Western rivals but are now growing distinct in terms of what they teach and the career boost they offer. Okay, Western schools have enhanced their offerings with double degrees, popular with domestic and overseas students alike, and boosted the prestige of their Chinese part. For students, a big draw is the chance to rub shoulders with captains of China's private sector. Their business courses now largely cater to the growing demand from China, which has become more global, richer, and ready to recruit from this Sinocentric student body. If you look at very clearly, he's talking about the courses offered, the degree, the Chinese business schools, and so forth. And he's talking about what he call rubbing shoulders with the captains of China's private sector for students. The one that is odd one out is number three. Western schools have enhanced their offerings with double degrees, popular with domestic and over students alike, and boosted the prestige of their Chinese partners. This doesn't seem to be in sync with the other four. So this is the odd one out. Now let's come to the next question. Businesses find automation such as robotic employees a big asset in terms of productivity and efficiency. But in recent years, robotics has had increasing impacts on unemployment, not just of manual labor, as computers are rapidly handling some white collar and service sector work. For years, politicians have promised workers that they would bring back their jobs by clamping down on trade. I think number three is a more general statement. So you can have three as the first set. Economists, based on their research, economists say that the bigger threat to jobs now is not globalization, but automation. So I think three should be followed by four because in three he says for years politicians have promised workers that they would bring back their jobs by clamping down on trade, offshoring and immigration. And what do the economists say? That the bigger threat to jobs now is not globalization but automation. So the tussle between globalization and automation is found to be in 3 and 4. So 3 should be followed by 4. Okay. After 4, you have the automation. Businesses find automation a big asset in terms of productivity and efficiency. So 4 is followed by 1. And of course, the last one is number 2, but in recent years, which opposes, you see, what has been stated in number 1. Let's come to the next exercise. He says here, Brazil's growth rate has been low, yet most Brazilians say their financial situation has improved and they expect it to get even better. This is because most incomes are rising fast. So the main point, he says that the growth rate in Brazil is low, and but Brazilians say that their financial situation is much better, and they will improve it. This is because incomes are rising fast with higher minimum wages and very low unemployment. So you have good employment and you have high wage. The result is falling inequality and a growing middle class. So the result, the consequence is inequalities are falling, they are disappearing, they are being reduced, and a growing middle class. The result of economic stabilization, improved social security, and universal primary education. These three things have contributed to the falling inequality and the growing bourgeois or the middle class. But despite recent improvements, the Brazilian economy is still painfully unequal, with poor Brazilians paying the biggest share of their income in taxes and getting the least back in government services. So let's see now which one is the best summary, you see. Economic reforms have benefited many Brazilians, but they are unaware of the impending problems from rising inequalities in their society. It doesn't say much about what we have discussed there in the passage. With rising incomes and falling unemployment, most Brazilians are being misled into thinking that their economy is doing well. Now, why use the word misled, you see? It's not the question of being misled. He has actually given you the data there. So there's nothing to be misled. So that is not a good summary. Most Brazilians feel they have benefited from recent economic events, but the poor continue to be dealt unfairly by the state. Now that is a very good summary. In two you see parts of sentences, he has summed up the whole thing. That most Brazilians feel they have benefited, but the poor, you see, continue to be dealt unfairly by the state. So number 3 is the best summary, and good economic indicators have masked the unfair taxation of the poor that is likely to destabilize the Brazilian economy in the next few years. Now, I don't think it's such a question of destabilization. So number 3 is the best option. Let's come to the next one. Restitution of artifacts to original cultures could face legal obstacles as many Western museums are legally prohibited from disposing of their collections. This is in response to countries like Nigeria, which are pressurizing European museums to return their precious artifacts looted by colonizers in the past. Museums in Europe today are struggling to come to terms with their colonial legacy, some taking steps to return artifacts but not wanting to lose their prized collections. Legal hurdles notwithstanding, politicians and institutions in France and Germany would now like to defuse the colonial time bombs and are now backing the return of the part of their home. The point is that once upon a time, you see, being ruled over, you see, by the British or the Europeans, and the problem is of returning those artifacts which they possibly looted. The most general sentence is number 3. Museums in Europe today are struggling to come to terms with their colonial legacy. That is the general sentence that we can take up. But not wanting to lose their prized collection, and this is in response to countries like Nigeria, which are pressurizing European museums to return their precious artifacts. This is in response. So number 3 should be followed by number 2. So the returning the artifacts, the same idea is carried in restoring of the artifacts in number 1, the restitution of the artifacts. You see, number 2 talks about the restoration of the artifact, the return of the artifacts, and number 1 talks about the restoration of the artifacts, right? Restoring the artifacts. So it should be 3, 2, 1, and of course the last one is 4. 3, 2, 1, 4.